Hey, this is Hans from Dakota Angler and Outfitter, and we've been fishing and tying a lot of jig style nymphs. Jig style nymphs are tied on a jig hook that were popularized in Eastern Europe and now have kind of taken over popularity for European style nymphing in Europe and across the United States. This happens to be a syndicate hook, a new hook that we're stocking. Got a unique barb that has kind of a little retainer point on it, or a retainer bend on it. And then we've got the syndicate slotted beads as well that are nice in that they come in a full 25 pack. So if you buy a 25 pack of hooks, you get 25 beads to match up with it. This is a pheasant tail, and it's going to be a CDC soft tackle pheasant tail jig. This was a really good pattern for us this year, especially for me in my guiding and my own fishing. Just a variation on a standard pheasant tail nymph, but very effective. So we have the hook and the vise with the slotted bead already slid on. I'm taking 70 denier ultra thread in a brown and wrap that back to the end of the hook shank. Just as the hook shank starts to curve there, we'll stop our thread and trim off our excess. Now we're going to take some feathers from the South Dakota state bird here, the ringneck pheasant, and got about 10 fibers or so. It depends on how full you want your fly. This happens to be a size 12, which in most circumstances would be quite large for us, but I've got about 10 or 12 fibers here. But this fly in this large of a size was actually quite good for us this year. What I'm going to do is tie these fibers in at the back and just kind of check them for length. What I want is my tail length to be roughly equal to the length of the hook shank. In this case maybe slightly shorter, but about right. I'm going to screw that down with 2 or 3 wraps. Fold those fibers back and up a little bit, and then I'm going to sneak my thread underneath. Advance my thread up behind the bead. Now I'm going to take some small copper wire. I'm going to lay that along the side of the hook shank. Wrap back over that wire until I get up to that tie-in point for the pheasant. Now I can advance my thread about 2/3 of the way to the front of the shank. Get my wire out of the way. Grab those pheasant tail fibers and bundle them together. Wrap those forward for the abdomen. And so get about right there, 2/3 of the way or so to the back of the bead. I'll tie those off. I can go ahead and trim off the excess. Get a couple additional wraps there to ensure that's tied down. Now we'll take our wire. We'll wrap the wire counter to the direction that we wrap the pheasant. This will ensure that that pheasant stands up to catching fish. Tie that off, and then I'll also fold it back. Make a couple additional wraps on that wire. Make sure it's not going anywhere. Now, I will take, this is going to be a flashback fly, and since this fly is a jig fly, it's going to ride with the hook point up. So to do the flash, I have to turn the hook upside down, and I want to tie my flash material, which is just a mylar tinsel, pearl tinsel, right at the start of the thorax here. But I'm tying it on essentially the bottom of the hook so that when it's riding hook point up, it shows. Next I'm going to take some peacock curl, which is going to be my thorax material. I'm just going to take a couple of strands, tie that in just behind the bead, and then advance my thread to just behind the bead as well. Now I can take my peacock curl and Make several wraps to build up my thorax. Once I've done that, I'll go ahead and tie that off and trim off my excess. Now I will take my flashback, tie that down by pulling it forward, then bringing the bobbin over the hook with my left hand. Lift that up and get a couple more thread wraps. There we go. I will trim off the extra flash material and save the remainder for another fly. Okay, we'll get a couple more wraps here to make sure that was in place. And then to finish the fly, we put a CDC soft tackle on it. That just gives the fly a little more movement in the water. Kind of gives it some legginess, and then also will trap a little air, makes it look like a bug that might be getting ready to emerge. What I've done here is I've got a CDC feather, this kind of a natural gray CDC feather, and I've taken a few fibers, trimmed them off the tip, so that by folding these fibers back, trimming off the fibers at the tip, I get a little tie-in point here. We'll tie that in right behind the bead. Now we're just going to wrap that like a soft tackle. And we don't need a lot of turns here, just basically one full turn around, and we'll tie that off. Once we've tied that off, we'll trim off our excess CDC feather. Take any fibers that might be going forward there, and we could just pull them back, get a few thread wraps in front of them to get them to angle back. And now we'll go ahead and do our whip finish. Just behind the bead. Trim off our thread. Now we have a CDC soft tackle pheasant tail jig. Looks a little bit wild with those long CDC fibers. Trust me, it works with those fibers that long. If you're looking for something a little sparser, you can always grab all the fibers, trim them a little bit shorter. But those CDC fibers really slick down when wet. And this fly was just a killer pattern for us this past year. And as much as we fish size 18 and smaller around here, even in a size 12, this pattern was tremendously effective for us here in the Black Hills, but also in our travels further west on the Bighorn River especially. One thing I like to do with this fly before taking it out of the vise is take a little head cement on my bodkin and coat these thread wraps behind the bead, just making them a little bit more protected from the fish's teeth. So there you have it. We have a flashback jig pheasant tail. If you don't tie jig flies already, you should start because they work like crazy, and this is a good pattern to start with. I'm Hans from Dakota Angler and Outfitter. Thanks for watching, and check out our other videos at our website flyfishsd.com.